little bullseye. There we go.
Okay. All right.
Great. Yeah. So I think, a significant reason why we expanded the existing cost containment mechanism in RGGI, or the existing ratepayer protections, was to account for the possibility that uh, the future might not look exactly like the modeling, right? And so we wanted safeguards there uh, in case the costs are more expensive than the modeling suggests. We have this mechanism to release more allowances into the market and relax the required reduction. So we don't have to reduce emissions as quickly, and the costs then are not as high, right, as they would be if we didn't adjust the cap. So
Okay.
that mechanism is there to try and help address that uncertainty. I'll say another piece that the states have always, Connecticut and the other states have always committed to these regional reviews that we conduct periodically. And so I think before the end of that 10-year period, and much sooner than that, the states will certainly do another review. We've already committed to start that review no later than 2028. It could also start earlier if we think it needs to start earlier. That also just provides another opportunity to adjust if you need to. If the future situation is different than we expected, then we can make we can agree to make future updates. That's something the states have shown that
Okay.
we
So
will always do to
for the team
keep the
here, I
rate
think that would
consistent.
be a good comment. There's additional safeguards in the current regulatory update, an improvement to the program. Yep. Thank you.
Sure. So Andy, I think maybe you're next now.
Yeah, I mean, I know energy efficiency works for like me as an individual homeowner and for businesses, but the slide that showed that it's an overall benefit, I'm curious as to how that is calculated, where that information is being drawn from.
The kind of net, the 3-to-1, 2-to-1 kind of savings.
Exactly.
Yeah, so those are when the utilities develop their plans, right? They develop conservation load management programs. They use a very. I'm not our CNLM expert, so I won't go too far over my
Best
skis,
guess.
but
Yeah.
but yeah, no, they use they do analysis. They look at the kind of past and projected future success of these different investments. I know periodically those things are reviewed as well, just to see if
Is
they are
there,
achieving.
I'm just curious if there's any data
you.
from ISO New England, because they've come out with some fantastic behind the meter solar data, which is very helpful. I understood, I think they used to do energy efficiency, but in any event, I'd be curious as to the the root causes. Not that I'm disagreeing with you, I just want to be clear on that, but can I say to a legislator, hey, this reduces everybody's bill and here's how? Because I have a feeling a lot of them don't understand that. Anyway,
Yeah.
so maybe you and I will correspond offline and pursue that.
Yeah,
But
and I'm more than
thank you.
happy to connect you to the extent I can't answer the question directly to, kind of our efficiency team who can certainly go much more into the weeds than I can. I think the efficiency programs, just at a high level, I mean, certainly the participating customers that install the more efficient equipment that allow them to use less energy, particularly with the incentives, under the programs, like they can save a significant amount on their bills, right? You can see kind of those savings right away. The broader grid, they'll also see savings because when you use electricity, not just you, but like all the participants use
Right.
electricity, that allows us to avoid a lot of other investments that we would have to make in the grid that would otherwise be socialized, across the grid. So investments in new distribution lines and infrastructure, investments in new transmission infrastructure, purchases of new generation that beyond what we have today. So like having to build new power plants in order to meet demand, like when you're able to reduce the overall level of demand, you can either avoid entirely or delay or defer those investments, which does lead to savings for the broader grid as well, including the non-participating customers in the programs.
Right.
That's
Thank you.
when the both our consultants on behalf of the states for these updates, but also some of the analyses that have been done in the past to look, backward looking at the benefits of RGGI. They kind of play through like how do those different investments, they have models that look at how those different investments provide the savings across the grid.
Thanks. I'll turn it over to Mark.
All right, thanks. I jumped in late, so I was wondering if you could give me a quick primer on how this impacts Class 1, the trading value for Class 1 and 3 RECs that we monetize through in the New England level outside of Eversource for either solar systems Class 1 or Class 3, namely for cogeneration. How might this jeopardize the forward future market for trading those RECs?
So that's probably more market kind of digging into the REC market than I'll be able to answer. I would say RGGI is not a REC program, right? So it's not directly requiring RECs or kind of doing any kind of compliance or anything monitoring with RECs. It does provide benefits to non-emitting resources generally that participate in the wholesale market, because those resources, essentially the wholesale market is going to be affected by RGGI compliance costs from emitting generation. They have to pay those costs, and so they have an extra operating cost. But non-emitting generation, including renewable energy, doesn't pay those costs. And so those generators do better in the market than they would without RGGI. And so that's for our Connecticut kind of grid scale renewables contracts and nuclear contracts. Those contracts perform better because of RGGI, because those essentially they earn more money in the wholesale market, and that means ratepayers pay less money. Exactly how that affects RECs, I'm not going to be able to answer that, but I think the renewable resources themselves should see some benefit from RGGI.
Okay, so it's not a direct correlation whereby the polluting power plants are required to meet some compliance standards, and if they fail to, they buy out that compliance, they buy RECs to meet that comply.
No, RGGI doesn't work through REC. So the emitting power plants have to buy carbon allowances, which are sold by the states. And so for every ton of CO2 they emit, they need to buy an allowance. And if currently there's an excess of allowances because the cap has historically, although it's come down, the power sector has been able to achieve emissions reductions even faster than the cap. So that means there's been more allowances than needed, but they still have value because allowances can be used in the future as well. So power plant owners can look and say, well, I can use this emit and use this allowance today, or I can hold on to this allowance and maybe use it in the future. So it does have that kind of opportunity cost value. But the compliance mechanism is purely through the carbon allowances and not through RECs.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure. Eunice.
Hi, thanks again. So way back when RGGI was set up, we didn't talk about the other costs of carbon, meaning the health and the, value of clean air and all these other things that aren't specified. When does that come in now? Because there is a cost avoidance to have cleaner air, but no one really talks about it. And also, like, when do grid enhancing technologies that each state can do locally by helping make distributed energy resources easier to be installed in people's homes? Because the lowest cost energy and the cleanest energy is right at the source where the energy is used. And then the last big elephant is, how do data centers fall into all of this? But really, is there a place other than what ISO New England is talking about to talk about these avoided costs health-wise and for environmental justice communities? Because so many of that extra allowances for running natural gas happens near the environmental justice communities, and they're affected the most. And yet that's part of these new RGGI regulations, right? There's that if it costs too much, we're gonna let polluters slide in, or it doesn't say it that way, but am I understanding what the RGGI is saying?
Yeah, no, it's a great point, and certainly don't want to lose the fact that RGGI is ultimately a pollution reduction program, right? It's designed to reduce emissions from the power sector, specifically CO2 emissions. But I mentioned the health study that was done of RGGI a few years ago that said, it's not just CO2, right? When fossil fuel power plants run less, or coal plants retire, or things like that, you also see reductions in other health harming pollution, SOx, NOx, particulate matter, ozone caused by some of those. So there are certainly significant health benefits from RGGI. I mentioned there's the study that was done, looked at just the first 6 years of RGGI, but it said for Connecticut alone, the health benefits were valued at between 150 and $300 million. Those health benefits show up in a lot of places. It's reduced, early mortality. It's reduced asthma attacks. It's fewer lost work days because people aren't, suffering from air pollution related illnesses, and greater productivity. So yeah, there's a huge number of health benefits, and then the cap itself is contributing to the cleaning up of the power sector across the region to reduce CO2 emissions. So we have seen emissions in the region decline by it's about 47% below their 2005 levels as of last year. That's not all because of RGGI. There are a lot of other programs. There are other just kind of market transitions and things like that that are a factor here. But RGGI is part of that story, and so emissions are not quite half as have been reduced by not quite half, but by a significant amount. The cap reduction, so the commitment kind of that states made and that are reflected in these regulations is to continue to reduce that cap, so that emissions are lower over the next decade than they are today. So it is the cap commitment is to bring that rate of emissions down, which in addition to contributing to helping address climate change, should also lead to continued improvements in health outcomes because there will be fewer co-pollutants. You're right that there's a range that is reflected in this agreement and in these proposed regulations, where the level of reduction could be as high as 90%, or it could be 60%. And it reflects a balancing of the kind of concerns and costs associated with affordability, but also a balancing against wanting to continue to make progress in this pollution reduction program. So I will say that if these cost containment mechanisms are triggered and additional allowances are released, the rate of emissions reduction won't be as fast, but it will still be a significant reduction from where we are today. Again, potentially 60% lower than we are today. So I think there should be continued climate and health benefits, including in impacted communities, but there is a balancing here of the pollution goals and purposes of the program and the overall ratepayer impacts. Oh, you're muted, Eunice.
Thank you. It helps me understand it a bit more now too. And when you said 60% lower than today, that's over the next 10 years, right?
Right, by 2037.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that is a good amount. However, there's a lot of unmeasuring that's going on right now because of different executive orders and whatnot, and even FERC, right? Allowing different things to come and happen differently than what this RGGI set of proposals has original or has been created by the different states that belong to RGGI, because lots has changed in the last year.
Yeah, certainly a lot has changed. I mean, RGGI's a state program. It's, states implementing a pollution reduction cap that's within our state authorities. But yeah, we're not the only factor in kind of where electricity markets go. But it's a way that states have successfully made progress over the last 17, 18 years and are proposing to continue to make some progress over the next decade.
Thanks. That'll help me write some comments, but I'll probably add that Reggie needs to be vigilant and see when it needs to get updated because of different circumstances. Thank you.
Sure. Diane?
Yes, Bruce, thank you for spending so much time with us. I wanted to understand what the historical real costs have been for compliance for the utilities over time. Have they paid more in relation to inflation than they had historically? Recently, have the caps been set at a very high level, moderate level? I know you said there were two different levels in which there would be more release, but if you could just walk us through that. And then also, has the state of Connecticut ever done a study of its own energy efficiency program effectiveness compared to other states? And is it common that the utility manages the energy efficiency programs? And would you compare yourself against only those states that do that? Or are there other mechanisms that have been looked at?
Yeah, so again, on the efficiency piece, I will defer to my colleagues who unfortunately are not here on the call, but who really run those programs and are much more familiar with the kinds of assessments. Certainly, there is a lot of assessment that goes into those programs. I know that just in the last this kind of last cycle of developing programs, a big initiative was on optimizing the investments and trying to make sure that the dollars are being used to use efficiently, again, as efficiently as possible, right? And I know that was a big focus. And so that's something that DEEP is involved in. There's also the Connecticut Energy Efficiency Board, which oversees those investments. So I can't kind of get into more detail than that, but I do know that there's a lot of analysis and kind of thought and work that goes into that. I also do know that utility administered programs are certainly used in other states. I wouldn't say all other states. I'm sure that some other states have different models, but we're not the only state that kind of uses that model. And I'm sorry, I know you had at least one or two other questions.
The one about the cost historically for the utilities of compliance, has it kept up with inflation, been greater than inflation? I know, I remember when they first established this kind of cap and trade system on NOx, the price was much lower to comply than the modeled price. And so that really attracted everyone's attention to using this kind of model. And I'm wondering how likely it is that these additional releases are going to be a factor.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. So the history of RGGI, allowance prices have increased over time, which is what you would expect in a program where the cap's decreasing. At the very early years of the program, the cap was a good deal higher than actual emissions. I think part of that was just a factor of kind of when this program came into being. So the cap took effect in 2009, right when the economy had kind of bottomed out, right, with the Great Recession. And so that led to less economic activity and less emissions kind of as a result of that, right? So I think we had, in the early years of the program, emissions were lower than had been anticipated, right? It was also, I think, and I wasn't around when at DEEP when this was established, but I think it was also the first time RGGI was the first regional kind of cap and trade program for CO2 mandatory program ever, right, in the U.S. And so it was, I think we were trying to figure out, like, how do you design this program and, kind of what analysis do you need and whatnot. But, regardless, the first few years, the cap was higher and prices were pretty low because of that. After they said the states do undertake these periodic regional program reviews. So a big outcome of the first program review that states did that finished in 2012, 2013, was to significantly lower the cap to try and have it be more reflective of where emissions were. So the states actually agreed to a 40% reduction in the cap, kind of as a part of that review, just recognizing that there was a lot more headroom in the cap than was needed, right? I did mention that emissions have still generally been lower than the cap, in kind of the history of the program, even including after that program review. But it's been much closer, right? And I think currently the emissions have been, kind of more or less in line with where the cap is. And so that's, good news in terms of if you're saying, well, the cap is a better reflection of kind of where the power sector is. And then just from, a cost perspective, so the costs are on fossil fuel power plants, right? So they're not directly on utilities, because with deregulation in Connecticut, like the utilities don't directly own that generation anymore, right? But the utilities do with standard service, like purchase energy, including that's influenced by the price on the wholesale market, and then they just kind of pass through those costs onto bills, right? They're kind of acting on behalf of ratepayers. So yeah, the utilities don't directly pay it, but the individual power plants do, and so I don't know exactly how those trends relate to like inflation or things like that, but as I said, the allowance prices have increased over time, but the overall economics of RGGI for consumers and has been net beneficial based on the macroeconomic assessments that have been performed in prior years. And so those assessments have kind of looked back every few years and said, like, okay, what did we see from RGGI? What were allowance costs, kind of what were power costs, and then what were the sort of benefits from the investments the states made in things like energy efficiency. And they've concluded that on an economic basis, the program has provided net benefits to the region. Andy.
Thanks, Bruce. Diane, you're all set though, right, with your questions? Okay, good. All right, so Bruce, this is going to be a sticky one. So, I understand that nuclear power has zero emissions in its operation. I could go on about its fuel supply because that's not the case. But I had always thought that RGGI, one of its goals is to support the creation and expansion of greenhouse gas reducing entities like solar, like wind, like energy efficiency. And I don't see how sending RGGI money to an existing nuclear power plant, which will continue to run whether we send RGGI money there or not. I'm not sure the logic behind that, but I don't want to get into that argument with you here. What I simply
Well,
want
I might
is
just clarify that. So we're not actually sending, none of Connecticut's RGGI money goes to Millstone or any of our nuclear contracts. The nuclear benefit, I was saying, there's those not because they're receiving money from RGGI, but because
okay.
they don't have to pay allowance costs. Those
Okay.
units become more competitive in the wholesale market. And then separately, because Connecticut has existing contracts with the Millstone power plant, when that power plant does better economically, those benefits flow back to ratepayers. So if that power unit is able to make more money in the wholesale market than it was before, ratepayers get the benefit of those additional earnings. And that means either the contract costs less, or as has been the more recent case, the contract actually provides net benefits to ratepayers. So that's not because we're sending money to RGGI, but it's just because as a non-emitting resource, that it's more competitive in the wholesale market than it would be otherwise.
Okay. I think it might be another conversation
Yeah, sure.
thread that you and I will follow up on, but I appreciate your answer. Thank you.
And I'm sorry, I know I interrupted you. I think, did you have another question that you were?
No, the question basically was, can you tell me if I'm off base or not, which you just did. So
Okay.
thank you.
Yeah, no, and happy to follow up with if you have kind of more questions on that later.
Okay. I see we're a little bit past time. We got 7:33 on my clock. Bruce, thank you so much. Does anybody have some final questions for Bruce? Seeing none, once again, Bruce, thank you so much. And everybody, I'll have a transcription out in a couple of days. I'm hoping that I got the entire thing recorded, but if not, I at least had the most of the Q&A recorded. And let's face it, that's the fun stuff. You guys can watch the recording, and but I'll get that out to you as well. Thank you, Bruce. This was, as the comment says from Patrice, very helpful indeed.
Yeah, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all. I see Dan asked for the slides. I'll send those to you, Andy. Feel free to distribute them to the group.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, if anyone is interested in submitting comments, they are due on August 3rd. There's the link that I put on the screen is in those slides. So if you click on that, you can get to the Connecticut e-regulations website.